Are we ready, Cheryl? Are you recording? Good
Yes,
afternoon. Good afternoon and happy Wednesday. This is a wonderful day in Pearland with rain pouring outside, and so we are happy that you're with us today. And the purpose of today's meeting is to recognize our target industries in Pearland. It's very important that we have a strong, economic, viable community, and we are appreciative of all of our target industries who provide jobs for our community. My name is Carol Arts-Buchek. I'm President and CEO of the Pearland Chamber of Commerce, and today's program is called BizConnect, virtual event. And our partnership is with the Pearland Economic Development Corporation, and again, it's specific to target industries and the jobs that they provide our community. And so we usually start our meetings with safety procedures, so just pay attention to where you are, know how to get out if you have to evacuate where you are in your office or at your home. And it is my specific honor to present to you those who are with us today. And in the meantime, if you could mute yourself and keep yourself muted throughout the program until the end. If there's time for questions, we'll do that. If not, during the presentation, you can add questions to your chat box. And with that, I will start with recognizing our public officials. We have 17 industries that are represented today on this Zoom virtual meeting, and I'd like to just list them off. Agreco, Caprock Oil Tools, Cardiovascular Systems, Inc., CBL, Pearland Town Center, Ethos Energy TurboCare, Freeze and Nickel, Kozas, Inc., Lonza, Memorial Herman, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Compressor, Packaging Service Company, PT Solutions, used to be Rex Supply, RefChem, Texas Honing, Third Coast Terminals, and Wilmer International. And our public officials include the following: Representative Ed Thompson, State Representative Dennis Paul, and our speaker, of course, is Patrick Jankowski with the Greater Houston Partnership. We appreciate him. With the City of Pearland, Clay Pearson, our City Manager, Trent Epperson, Assistant City Manager, Johnny Spires, Police Chief, Vance Riley, Fire Chief, and Josh Lee, Communications Director. With the Pearland Economic Development Corporation, we have President Matt Buchanan, Vice President Brian Malone, Directors John Lyle, Chad Thuman, and Antonio Johnson. Representing the Pearland CVB, which is the Convention and Visitors Bureau, is Tracy Rohrbacher. With Alvin Community College, we have Dr. Crystal Albrecht and Dewana Bowie with Houston Community College. Superintendent John Kelly with the Pearland Independent School District, and Gary Buchek with the San Jacinto Small Business Development Center. With the Chamber, we have myself, and Cheryl Kepp is the Senior Vice President of the Chamber, and she's also our technical guru for today. Mark Smith is our Chair of the Board, Donna Conley, past Chair of the Board, and Drew Hall, Chair-elect. Stuart Kaye is Vice Chair of Governmental Relations, Sasha Costa, Vice Chair of Business Development, Letty Lur, Vice Chair of Membership Relations, and Dr. Alexander Okwana, Vice Chair of Governance. And with that, I will turn it over to, and thank you all for being here. Thank you for your leadership. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian, who will introduce our guest speakers.
Thank you, Carol. And again, we appreciate you taking time to be with us here today on this virtual meeting. We really have a power-packed event here that's going to, I think, provide you with a lot of information. So appreciate you coming today, and we're going to get right into it. Our first presentation will be by Trent Epperson. Trent is the Assistant City Manager for the City of Pearland. He's been in that position since 2014, and he has been involved in engineering, capital projects, you name it. Trent has a great background. Trent is going to be talking today about capital improvement projects that you see going on around the city and what's happening there. So we'll let Trent have his show, and then after Trent, we'll get to the next section. So Trent, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. That worked so well when we got prepped for this about 15 minutes ago. So just took me a minute to get the presentation. Does everyone see the presentation now? We good? All right. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our capital projects today and some of our infrastructure projects. Let me make sure I can move through the presentation. There we go. So we already did introductions of some of the city staff, so I'm not going to go back through this today, but several of us on here today that have input and involvement in many of these capital projects. So appreciate them being here today. But while we are going to run through several mobility projects as well as other projects, we're going to highlight some of those, but we've got many, many other projects underway throughout the city, and we're just trying to hit the biggest highlights that are the most impactful for the community, the business community, and our citizens. A lot of these projects that we have going on are obviously catching up to our growth we've had over the last several years, the last decade and a half or so, still trying to catch up, especially on mobility and roadways. But a lot of these other projects we're also looking to the future. We're trying to not only meet the needs of today, but planning for what we need in the future and ensuring we meet the needs of our businesses and our residents for many, many years to come. So moving into the presentation, we're going to cover mobility projects. We're going to cover water. We're going to cover water and wastewater, drainage projects, so many things we've got going on, bringing our fire department from where we were 10 and 15 years ago with a full volunteer fire department to today where we operate a 24/7 fire, EMS, and rescue department. And then what we've got going on for a new West Side library as well as new public works facilities. So this covers all of our mobility projects, and I'm not going to go through each of these. We're going to highlight some of these as we move forward, but what I want to point out here is we've completed several projects over probably the past 18 months. We've got several other projects under construction right now, and then several more projects to come in the next several years. And the big thing to point out here is on the project list on the left side, I put next to those, who's responsible for those projects. So you see there's a lot of partnerships that go into developing these mobility projects and delivering those. And so we've got city-led projects, we've got Brazoria County-led projects, TxDOT-led projects, and even Fort Bend County on the FM 521 project. And then the other thing I'd like to point out here is down at the bottom where you see totals.
You guys should have it.
We've got where we got city and county funded on these projects. We got $90 million of our local funds, and we've really been able to leverage those funds with state and federal funds. So for that $90 million of local funds, we're actually getting about $370 million of roadway projects, with the state and federal funds making the balance of that up. So getting into some of the specific projects, we've got the State Highway 288 toll lanes, and this is a project led by Brazoria County as well as TxDOT, and this is creating the 4 toll lanes in the median space on 288. The project's been, everyone should be well aware of it, it's been under construction for the past 3 years or so. Ultimately, it'll be 29 miles when it's completed, extending from US 59 in downtown Houston all the way out to the future Grand Parkway and 288 intersection. It's nearing completion. We should see those toll lanes start to open this fall, and that's really going to change the character of that corridor. It includes the direct connectors at Beltway 8, and then very importantly includes direct connectors into the medical center as well. So we'll have a lot more mobility in that corridor. And then I think the big other piece of that the EDC has been working on, and you can see in this slide here, in this picture, is that we've got a large beautification package going along with that. That's really going to be kind of marquee for the Houston area, so people know when they're in Pearland. We're going to really identify this area as Pearland, so folks know when they enter Pearland, it's going to have a much better look, a much better feel than many of the other freeways around here. So really create that sense of place for Pearland. that's really important to economic development. One other piece of this that was not part of the current construction, but that's coming along and looks like it'll go to construction before the end of the year, is building a northbound frontage road between Magnolia Parkway and FM 518. That's really one of our most congested areas. And by creating that frontage road there, we'll have additional outlets and ways to get in and out of the shopping areas there, as opposed to having all the traffic come in and out on 518 from that southwest corner there, the shopping center. So lots of improvements coming here. Of course, a big piece of this was also redoing the overpass at 518 and creating additional capacity there. So we're going to start reaping the benefits of this additional mobility here very soon. The next project is the FM 518 or Broadway widening. This is a TxDOT-led project, and the overall project scope is from 288 all the way to State Highway 35. There's an initial phase of that. Phase 1 actually has funding, and that's from 288 to basically Cullen, a little bit east of Cullen. And you know, that project's moving forward with design, the entire segment with design later this year. Right-of-way acquisition on the Phase 1 probably early next year, and then the construction dollars are available to start construction in 2024, and that'll widen the corridor from its existing 4 lanes to a 6-lane curb and gutter with a median cross section, and really be able to take advantage of the additional capacity we also are creating there at 288. McCowa Road is another one. This is a city-led design. We're leading the design work on this. And then because it's multi-jurisdictional, it gets into Brookside Village, City of Houston, and Harris County. We're actually going to have TxDOT lead the construction portion of the McCowa Road project. But it's a widening of McCowa Road from its existing 2-lane asphalt cross-section to a 4-lane concrete curb and gutter roadway. And we've got that currently scheduled for bidding out in 2021. McCard Road project, this long-awaited project we've worked on for many years. We've actually, our city council just awarded the construction contract a couple of meetings ago. So this will be under construction here very shortly, and that'll complete McCard Road basically from where it ends at Cullen all the way over to where it ends at McCowa. Create that connection there, and so we've got a great east-west corridor that parallels 518 and the Beltway in between those two to help alleviate some of the traffic on 518. So real happy to get this project underway and going. That'll take about 2 years to complete, and then we'll be able to take advantage of the benefits of that. Hughes Ranch Road, this has been under construction for about a year. It's a widening of Hughes Ranch Road between Cullen and Smith Ranch Road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. And we expect that that'll be completed in about another year. So moving out of the mobility area into some of our other infrastructure, we're working on a surface water plant. This is, the city has multiple sources for water. We have well water. We purchase water from City of Houston. We've secured water many years ago out of the Gulf Coast Water Authority Canal. It's Brazos River water. And so this is the project to develop and produce that water. So we got a Phase 1 that's going to produce 10 million gallons per day. That's going to meet our needs. Basically starting in 2023, we're going to have to start relying on this water as well. So that's our target date for being online. So it's located on County Road 48, south of County Road 59, adjacent to the canal. You can see in the picture there on the left, you see the canal. On the right, you see Mustang Bayou. And then that's the ongoing dirt work in our early phases of construction. So we've released some early work packages, and the actual plant construction itself will start later this year. But that's a huge project that will provide us water for many years to come. And it's on about a 5-year construction. You know, we started a year or so ago, and then in 2023, we'll start producing that water and be able to put that into our system. Another major water project is moving to an advanced meter infrastructure metering system. And it basically converts the older technology to smart meters like you have on your house for electricity, where we'll have a portal to where you can get more information on how much water you use and when you use it. And we can set, or you can set alerts as to when you meet certain thresholds. And then the reading of those meters is then done all remotely. So we're well into this project, currently scheduled for completion by the end of 2020. Moving over into the wastewater side of things, we recently in 2019 completed an expansion of our Reflection Bay water reclamation facility. This is the wastewater plant that serves the Shadow Creek and the commercial areas on west of 288. And we expanded that from 2 million gallons to 6 million gallons. So we are able to continue to grow into that capacity for many, many years to come. So 2 other wastewater plants that we're working on the expansions, and those will be occurring starting later this year and into next year and take another couple of years to complete, is our Berry Rose Reclamation Facility. This serves more kind of the northeast side of town. It's off of Pearland Parkway. We're expanding that from a little over 3 million gallons to 8.5 million gallons. So not only does this provide us growth for the future and for existing development that's going on today, one of the other key things with this one is our Longwood treatment plant is off of Dixie Farm Road. It's built in an old oxbow of Clear Creek, very vulnerable to flooding. During Hurricane Harvey, went underwater for several days and was inoperable. So the vulnerability of that, we want to create more resilience in our system. So we're going to move that capacity to the Berry Rose facility, and that's part of that project as well. And then the last one is the John Hargrove Environmental Center plant, and that's off of Magnolia, and we're working on an expansion from 4 million gallons to 6 million gallons there. And so these expansions will serve us for many, many years to come as we continue to grow. So on aware that the big Clear Creek project that's been on the books for 60 years is finally moving forward. After Hurricane Harvey, there was funds allocated for improvements on Clear Creek. Harris County Flood Control has now taken the project and is the lead agency on it. They've gone through, they've done their surveying, they're now going through the modeling, and are very close to starting moving into the actual design work and land acquisition on the project. They're doing this as a design build, so they're really accelerating the project and moving forward that as quickly as possible so that we can have the benefits of those improvements to reduce our future vulnerability to flooding and major hurricane events. So the project consists of some large bypass channels that parallel the existing creek. It includes widening out the high banks and deepening the high banks of the existing creek to create that additional capacity. And basically the improvements extend from 288 to Dixie Farm Road. So we'll see the improvements, we'll see the impacts of those improvements here in Pearland, and the improvements are also designed to have to show improved conditions downstream of us as well. So major, long-awaited project that's really going to help our community in the long run. So we appreciate our federal and partners on that, as well as the state, and then of course our local partners to the north, Harris County Flood Control and Brazoria Drainage District number 4. Oops. So fire department, we provide full-time firefighting and EMS and ambulance services. As we've grown the department, we're up to 142 full and part-time. From an emergency services perspective, it's fire suppression, advanced life support, rescue operations, hazmat, incident mitigation, as well as responses to weather-related emergencies. And then, of course, our non-emergency things that we do is fire prevention inspections, educational programs, code enforcement, as well as health inspections operate out of the fire department as well. And then, we operate 6 mobile intensive care units 24/7. And then all of our personnel, whether they're part of the EMS response or fire response, are all certified as emergency medical technicians or paramedics. So what are we doing as we grow the department and support the department? We recently opened new fire station number 1. This replaced a station that was in a facility for, it was well over 60 years old, developed as a volunteer station. And so this new station, state of the art, provides all the dorm rooms and all the requirements of today's fire department. And we opened that just recently. So we're also working on some other fire stations. Fire station number 4, we're in the design on that. We expect to go under construction late this year and have that completed next year. And that again will replace an existing volunteer type station with the needs of today. Fire Station 7, this one is located off of, this one will be located off of Bailey Road and Veterans Drive in the future. We've acquired the land for that. We're still working on when we're going to schedule the construction of that. And then Fire Station 8, which is on Shadow Creek Parkway, is the picture you see here. And that project is nearing the end of completion, so we can put this fire station into operation. And this one will, it'll be our second fire station west of 288, looks to serve everything up to the Beltway, west of 521, east of 288, as well as south down towards 518, to serve all of those areas and really start to reduce our response times in those areas. So Shadow Creek Library is the next project, and this is currently, if you're familiar with our West Side Library, it is in the HEB Strip Center, or the SIP Strip Center adjacent to the HEB. It is a very small facility, even though it is the highest, or competes with the highest circulation in the county for libraries. It competes with the Tom Reed Library located on near City Hall. So high volume of users, high volume of traffic, and really an inadequate facility. So working through the Shadow Creek Ranch TERS, we've been able to advance this project and move it forward much quicker. So the plan is we're constructing approximately 39,000 square foot library. It'll also include a Brazoria County tax office and some public meeting spaces. It's going to be really a great facility to serve the community. And we're well underway in designing that and looking to start construction later this year. And then last but not least is our Public Works facility. So similar to the old Fire Station 1, our Public Works folks operate out of a facility built over many years, but in the 60s and 70s, and buildings that are not designed to withstand any kind of weather events, are really inadequate for today's needs. So we've started the first phase of this project to build a new administration building that'll serve not only day-to-day administration for Public Works, Engineering, and Capital Projects groups. It'll also serve as a facility to operate out of during hurricanes and emergencies for that operational portion of our emergency response. And then phase 2 will be then to replace all our operation and maintenance facilities. We've got, at one point, I think we had 12 to 15 buildings on site that were really built over time, inefficient, don't meet the needs of today. And so bringing all of the rest of Public Works operation and maintenance up to today's standards. And the administration building is actually under construction, and looking to get the operation and maintenance facility under construction in the next couple of years. So with that, a lot of more information on pearlandtx.gov. We've got project milestones and lots of details on these projects and many other projects available to you through our website. So if there are any questions, I'll try to answer those now. And I think we were going to do that through the chat box on Zoom. So.
All right. Thanks, Trent. We appreciate that. And as Trent mentioned, if you have a specific question that you want to chat with Trent about, just do it in the chat. But I can guarantee you, you're going to like what the next presentation. It's going to be jam-packed with even more information. Patrick Jankowski is our next presenter, and Patrick is the Senior Vice President of Research for the Greater Houston Partnership. He has been in that position for a number of years, and he's actually been with GHP or its predecessor for 30 years. So Patrick is a wealth of knowledge in terms of what happens in the Houston area. He's been in over 200 publications, those things in terms of his information going out. So Patrick is a wealth of information. We're pleased to have him here today. And Patrick has been talking about Houston.
Can you see the presentation?
I can see it.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, thank you very much, guys. I apologize for that. Like I said, we heard a loud boom and all the power went off in the neighborhood. My son lives a couple blocks away and I've got the text from him, Dad, is the power off at your house as well? And I said, yes. And the word from Centerpoint is it won't be fixed until about 2:15, which I think is kind of optimistic since it's raining very hard right now. So what we're going to try to do is, technology is wonderful when it works, and this may be an example of something wonderful, the fact that we've been able to scramble and put this together. I have my cell phone propped in front of me, and it looks like either Carol or Cheryl are going to be running my slides. My only concern is I've got about 60% power on my phone, and I'm using my phone for both a hotspot and for as a phone to talk to you guys. So let's go ahead and get started. First slide, Houston Regional Outlook. Let's go. Carol or Cheryl, which one of you are running my slides?
Cheryl is.
Okay, Cheryl, would you go ahead and advance to the next slide, please? Just want to let you know, work for the Great Eastern Partnership. Thank you very much for the introduction, Brian. We have probably the easiest web address in the world to remember, and that's houston.org. You see it there on the screen. If you want to find out a little bit more about what the partnership is doing and how we try to work to support Pearland in your growth, you can go to the houston.org website. Next slide. And if you would like a copy of my slides, I will send you a PDF of them. Of course, I'll have to wait until the internet comes back up, but I'd be glad to send you a PDF of my slides, and that way you can have them for reference. The slide, please. Let's start with the headline. CNN Business, the U.S. economy created 4.8 million jobs in June. But that's not the whole story. Let me tell you a little bit what the whole story is. Slide, please. What you're looking at is job growth going back about the last 12 months. And you can see we were creating anywhere between 100 and 200 and 260, 70,000 jobs. And you can see how bad April was, and you can see how bad May was. And this is U.S. employment. And you can see the U.S. economy lost about 22,000 jobs during the depth of the pandemic. Luckily, we created 4.8 last month, and we created 2.7 the month before, so that gets us to about 7.5 creation. But we're still 14 to 15 million jobs below where we should be. There's still 14 to 15 million people, at least, who are not working, who are working back in March. Slide, please. Another way to look at this, that green line represents cumulative jobs created going back to January 2014 all the way up to the beginning of the pandemic. And as you see the line goes up, that's more and more jobs, and you can see how we created close to 15 million jobs over that period. And then when you see that green line drop below the red line, that's telling us we lost everything we created and then some. And right now we're pretty much back up to zero. You know, you read that red line by zero, I mean, we're back up to the level of employment of the US where we were in January 2014. In essence, we've lost 6 years worth of job growth. And that's the question as we're trying to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, and as we hear jobs being created, how quickly can we create the same number of jobs going forward that it took us 6 years to create going backwards? Slide, please. This is initial claims for benefits. These are individuals who have lost their job and filed their first time claim for unemployment benefits. And you can see the peak for the US was late March, early April, and how it's gradually trended down. But what concerns me when I look at this slide is since the middle of June up until the middle of July, we really haven't seen a drop off in initial claims, which is suggesting that we're not seeing a drop off in people losing jobs. We're still seeing job loss at a rate of roughly somewhere over 1 million jobs. Now, these are initial claims. There's going to be some duplication in there, people who filed and didn't get approved the first time, so they're going to file the second time, or went onto the system and then logged out, or for some reason their application was kicked out. But it still shows there's a significant number of people in the US. Think about that every week, 1.4 million people are filing their first claim for unemployment insurance. Slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about unemployment. Once again, these are all US numbers. I'm going to talk about the US, and then from the US, then I'm going to go ahead and talk about Houston. Slide, please. You could see the unemployment rate. Look at the left-hand side, and that's where we were during the Great Recession for the U.S. And we thought that was a pretty high unemployment rate, got just above 10%. And then you could see we got pretty close to almost to 15% at the height of the pandemic. And it's dropped off some, but we're still in double digits. Now, we had this long period where it seemed like everybody could find the job. The unemployment rate fell below 4%, and then that spike. Next slide. So these are unemployment rates for the U.S. One of the things we can get from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we can get it out on a national basis. We can't get these numbers for the Houston metropolitan area. We can't get them for Pearland specific. But Houston is becoming more and more like the U.S. I doubt there's much of a difference between what we're seeing in the U.S. unemployment rates and what we'd be seeing in a Houston unemployment rate or a Pearland unemployment rate. You can see the current unemployment rate for all workers is about 11.1 for men. It's 10.2 for women, for teenagers. But look at the March column and then slide over and look at the June column. And you can see the unemployment rate for all workers is still almost 3 times what it was just a few months ago. For men, it's more than double. For women, it's almost 3 times. Teenagers seem to be doing a little bit better. I don't understand that. It could be that, especially since there are no summer camps and very little recreational activities. The way the data is actually gathered, it's gathered from a household survey where people are called up on the phone and questions are asked about the people working in the household. If you are not looking for work, you're not considered unemployed. It may be when we see the teenage unemployment rate has improved so much, it may be that the teenagers just said, there are no jobs out there, I'm not going to look this summer. And that's the reason why their unemployment rate it seemed to have improved so much better than the others. Next slide, please. This is unemployment rates. Back up, please, one. And that often happens to me. It's the buttons are real sensitive, so that may happen a couple times, guys. We'll just go back and forth as we need to. You can see the unemployment rate for whites, for blacks, Hispanics, and Asians. You can see that the white unemployment rate has improved significantly. It's almost down below double digits, but you can see the unemployment rate for blacks and Hispanics has barely moved. And for Asians, it's barely moved. It's still in the mid double digits. Once again, these are unemployment rates for the U.S. as a whole, but there's no reason to think we'd see a significant difference in Houston and Pearland. The rates are likely very, very similar. Next slide. Okay, thank you, Cheryl. This is taking some of the same data on unemployment. This is continuing claims for benefits. The way the methodology is defined, it's someone who's applied for unemployment benefits 2 consecutive weeks or more. And these are people who they're not long-term unemployed. That has a different connotation, but people who are still looking for work. People who still need to draw their unemployment benefits because they haven't been able to find work. And you can see our continuing claims peaked at around 22.4 million for the US, and it's trended down, but you can see in July, we still had 18.3 million Americans who are filing continuing claims who've been out of work for 2 or more weeks. You know, at 18.3 million Americans, the US workforce altogether, it's about 160 million people. So you can do the math and you can see that it's well over 10% of the workers out there are filing continuous claims. It's at 11 or 12%. Now, another way to think about that, every 1 out of every 9, maybe 1 out of every 8 workers out there has not been able to find work. 1 out of every 8 American, and it's still needing to draw down these unemployment benefits. It's kind of a sign just how much the labor force has been impacted. You can look, my little arrow on the left-hand side, the Great Recession peak. You can see at the worst part of the Great Recession, which we thought was a horrible downturn, the peak for continuing claims was 6.5. So we're about 3 times where we were at the worst part of the Great Recession. Okay, slide please, Cheryl. Let's talk about U.S. industrial production. Now, Houston's economy has diversified, but as we've diversified, we've become more and more dependent upon U.S. economic growth. Now, there are 3 things that really support Houston's economy. One is obviously oil and gas. It remains very important to us. The other is global trade. We've got 4 ports in the region plus an airport. and also our ties to the U.S. economy. You know, I'm a native Houstonian, native Texan. I hate to admit it, but Houston is part of the U.S. And when the U.S. does well, Houston tends to do well. So that's one of the things we're going to need to see for us to come out of this COVID recession, is to see the U.S. pick up. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. And this is the U.S. industrial production, the capacity utilization, how much of our industry we are utilizing. And you can see prior to the pandemic, we were pretty close. We were above 80% or close to 80%. During the worst part of the pandemic, we fell below 64.5. We fell to around 62. And it's picked up somewhat. But you can look and see on that far right-hand side just how much further we have to go to be further utilizing our capacity. So that says one thing. It says something about employment. When capacity utilization is so low, that's one reason why you're not going to see manufacturing employment or utilities employment or energy employment picking up. It also, when capacity utilization is so low, you're not going to see businesses making much investment in new plant machinery and equipment, because what they have is underutilized. If this thing goes on for a while, maybe what will happen is the existing plant equipment becomes obsolete and you have to make investments in new technology. But right now, I don't see those investments taking place because what we currently have is underutilized. Next slide, Cheryl. This is industrial production index. It looks very similar to the previous chart, but it's not. This is the sum output of all mines, of all utilities, and all manufacturing plants in the U.S. It's something that's put together by the Federal Reserve Bank, Federal Reserve System. And you can see that the dip in the very middle was the Great Recession. We didn't get quite down as far, but you can see how far we did fall. If you followed along and you look between 16 and 17, and you can see that little dip right there, that's one of the things I like to point to that says just how important the oil and gas industry is, because mining, oil and gas exploration is a mining process. We are extracting minerals from the earth. And you can see the industrial production for the U.S. fall when we had the fracking bust in 15 and 16. And there you can see it falling again during the great COVID downturn. When we see what's going on with the oil and gas industry right now, it's going to take quite a while for us to get back up to where we were for industrial production. Next slide. So what I did is I pulled out two of the components of this, and this is manufacturing part of industrial production. And you can see how the manufacturing part fell a little over 5% in March and 50% in April, so over 20%. And you can see that little bit of a pickup. And you can't quite add the two together because it's a percent on top of a percent. But you can definitely see that manufacturing activity remains very much below where it was prior to the downturn. And as you saw it earlier in the industrial production index. Slide, please. And this is mining. And this is what definitely we're seeing the impact of the downturn in the oil and gas industry and the mining component. And it went down significantly in April and May. And when you see in June and you say that, well, it isn't quite as far down as it was in April and May, it's probably because we cut so much out in April and May. I'm not sure how much there is to cut out. And we've seen the downturn in the oil and gas industry. It's actually been struggling since December 2014. I'll talk about that in a moment. But when you see industrial production down, that's something which is going to be weighing on the U.S. recovery, and it won't be until we start to see some growth in industrial production that we'll start to see some healthier growth in the U.S. economy. Slide, please. So let's talk about a little bit about U.S. GDP growth. Slide, please. Real GDP, you can see where we were growing. This is GDP, gross domestic product, probably the best overall measure of all economic activity in the region. I mean, in the U.S. And you can see where we're going on around 2%, got up to 3% sometimes, a little below. And you can see that first quarter U.S. GDP shrank by 5%. And it's interesting because you need to think about it. The first quarter, it's 13 weeks. First quarter went from January 1st to March 31st. We didn't start shutting down the economy really until the second week of March. And you can see those last 3 weeks of the quarter, what a significant impact it had on U.S. GDP. Slide, please. So the Wall Street Journal does a survey of economists, about 60 prominent economists. Some of them are from academia, some of them are from business, some of them are from government. and asks them for their projections of what they expect GDP to be like the 4 quarters moving forward. And this is what they were projecting for the second quarter, the quarter that we just finished up, June 30th. We'll be getting the data on that in a couple days or a couple weeks. And you can see how, as the data came in, the economists out there became more and more pessimistic. Back in March, they thought, oh, it would be a mild downturn. But you see, it's pretty much coming in at around 30% or better downturn is probably what we are going to see when we finally get the data for the second quarter. So yeah, that 5% downturn in the first quarter, that 30% in the second quarter, and you can see we're pretty much sliced a third out of U.S. economic activity in the first and second quarter. So next slide, please. The same group of economists are projecting growth. You can see they weren't projecting it back in March, but their latest forecast, the one they issued in June, thinks it will grow about 15%. We'll make up some of the ground we lost. Next slide. You can see they think in the fourth quarter we'll still be growing, not quite as fast as we were in the third quarter. You can see they kind of revised that down a little bit since their June forecast. Next slide. And you can see where they are for the first quarter of next year and the second quarter. So it's not good math to really add all these percentages together, but you can see, even if you just did that though, you can see that we're looking at the middle of next year before economic activity returns to its pre-COVID levels. Doesn't surprise me then that Google came out with their big announcement yesterday. They're allowing a lot of their workers, or their entire workforce, to work from home. Let's go to the next slide. It's a little bit different. This is the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, and this is their forecast for the year, their annual forecast. And that red bar, they're saying that even with the growth that they're expecting in the second and third quarter, as strong as it'll be, they expect the U.S. economy to be almost 6% smaller at the end of 2020 than it was at the beginning of 2020. And you're looking, their forecast for 21 is 4.8% growth. So even through all of next year, we won't get back to where we were, looking at maybe sometime in 2022. So, you know, the CBO, U.S. Congressional Budget Office, they are a nonpartisan agency. And what they're simply supposed to do is when a budget is passed or a bill is passed or proposed, they're simply supposed to go and analyze what they think the economic impact will be so they can better inform Congress. And this is based on their analysis back in June, what they thought would be happening with the economy. So, you know, we're still in for 12 months of uncertainty and weakness and struggling with the COVID pandemic. Slide, please. So let's talk about Houston, what we see going on in Houston. Slide. This is the growth and employment for the 9-county metropolitan area, which does include Brazoria County. This is for the Austin, Brazoria, Chambers, Fort Bend, Galveston, Harris, Liberty, Montgomery, and Waller counties. And you can see how we were going on at a fairly steady pace, adding 5,000 to 6,000 jobs. As we coming up to the holidays, we're adding 11,000, and you can see the drop off in March and the drop off in April. We did pick some up in May, and that corresponded with Governor Abbott allowing the state to slowly reopen. We started opening some hospitals, and we started opening some restaurants and some bars, and people felt they're going to tentatively go back to work. And you can see May and June. But you can just look at that. You can tell that we have not nearly got back the number of jobs we've lost. Slide, please. This is, once again, initial claims. This is like the one I showed you for the U.S. And once again, we're still seeing, the peak was March and April, but we're still seeing a disturbingly high level of claims. We're still seeing over 20,000 people every week in this region filing initial claims. So, just real simple. You're looking at, in a month, we're seeing 100,000 people saying that they need to file for unemployment insurance because they've lost their job. Slide, please. So give you some idea where the layoffs are occurring. We have a database that we maintain where we're trying to track all the announcements that have an impact on Houston. It could be a corporate-wide announcement, and we know there's significant employment here. It could be specific to Houston. And you can look at this list, and you can see the names on the list. Some of these are companies which probably don't surprise you, like Landry's or Luby's, because they're restaurants. And then you see other companies like the nonprofits like the Houston Center for the Alley, and then you're seeing the oil and gas companies like Weatherford and Baker Hughes. You know, the layoffs have been across every industry, across every sector, across just about every occupation and job title. Slide, please. So this is continuing claims. Once again, this is the number of people who have filed for benefits at least 2 weeks or more. Some of them 2 weeks, some of them have probably filed for 10 weeks because they lost their job back in March. And you can look at some of the past events where we were for Ike or the Great Recession or Hurricane Harvey. But simply go to March and you can see March this year, there were 32,000. Now they're close to 260,000. So you're still looking at 228,000 people more than the norm, 220,000 people above where we're in a normal time filing these continuing claims. It says Gulf Coast WDA, that's the workforce development area. That's basically the MSA plus a few of the surrounding counties. Slide, please. So Governor Abbott issued his phase one or announced his phase one openings, and we have seen a little bit of a progress in the economy as a result. Slide, please. These were job losses that we saw in March and April. Biggest hit, not surprising, hotels, restaurants, and bars. Healthcare. I mean, no one wants to go see the dentist when things are good. And when everyone's worried about COVID, that makes it a double reason not to schedule that cleaning appointment. You can see what happened with construction and retail trade and wholesale. So slide, please. And now you're seeing what we've gathered back in those areas. You can see what's happened with the hotels, restaurants, and bars and so forth, these blue slides. So we've gained back a lot of the jobs, but we still have, when you look at the red, it gives you an idea, they're close to 50,000 people in the hospitality industry still out of work, and healthcare and construction and so forth. Slide, please. Look at the losses in administrative support, educational services. Educational services, that's private sector education. That's not school districts. I'll talk about that in a minute. Administrative support, that's contract laborers, it's back office operations, that's security and janitorial services. If the buildings aren't opened up, you're not going to be cleaning them quite as often. Slide, please. And you can see what we've recouped. Educational services, evidently they made a real problem with their estimate early on, and it looks like educational services lost a lot more jobs. You can see some of the jobs have picked up on administrative support, but transportation and warehousing continues to struggle. Slide, please. You can see where we lost in other services. Other services is where you'll find auto repair, nail salons, barbershops, beauty salons, manufacturers, government. That right there is primarily going to be educational services. School districts, community colleges, state-funded universities. You can see mining and logging, oil and gas, professional science technical services. That's where accounting and legal and IT will be in. Slide, please. And you can see we got back a little bit in other services and manufacturing, but government lost significantly more. Mining and logging, the oil and gas has lost more, and got back a little bit professional science technical services. So yeah, we've recouped some of the jobs, but you can see there's really some really big gaps out there in employment. I think the government's a little bit overstated because we always tend to see a drop off in June because of the teachers or educators which are on 10 months contract. We should start to see some improvement when we get the August and September numbers, at least hopefully we will. Slide, please. So where were we? March and April, we lost 350,000 jobs. May and June, we added 133,000. But that still leaves 217,000 jobs left to be recouped. Employment is over 200,000 jobs below where it was in February, even with this partial reopening. Think about it. We have about 3.2 million jobs in the region. We lost 200,000. That's 1 in every 16 jobs has been lost. Slide, please. So this is not a forecast. Once again, this is not a forecast. This is just to try to put something in perspective. Give you an idea. In a normal year, we create 66,000 jobs. So at the current rate, we might, and if we could just do a normal rate of growth, it might take 3 years to recoup all this. Long-term average based on a monthly average would be 4 years. Best annual growth we've ever had, maybe 2 years. And then maybe we'll see a huge spike in job growth for the next 2 to 3 months as people learn how to deal with the pandemic. But once again, maybe we won't, and it may take us quite a while. I think we'll be in this at least another 12 months. Slide, please. So let's mid-year report. What are we seeing for some of the data mid-year? slide. Purchasing Managers Index, PMI. It's a question that goes out from the Institute of Supply Management to the manufacturing and the hospitals and the heavy service industries out there. Whenever that dark blue line is below the red line, based on the survey that shows the economy is expanding. Whenever it's above the red line, that's whenever it's above the red line, that's expansion. Below the red line is contraction. You can look to the far left and you see the Great Recession. You see that downturn in 15 and 16, that's the fracking bust. That little bitty dip between 17 and 18, that's actually Hurricane Harvey, the impact it had on the economy. And then you can look at where we were earlier during the pandemic. We fell further than we've ever fallen in the history of the data series. We've just got back up to neutral. And that's based on people's responses in June, and that was before the COVID outbreak. My concern is when we get responses for July, we may dip back below the neutral point. Slide, please. Sales tax collections, these are for the 12 most populous cities in the region. Now, there are over 120 cities in the region that collect sales tax. It's kind of hard to track all 120, so what I do is just track the 12 most populous, which actually represents about 90% of all sales tax collections in the region. And you can see how it's not just consumers that spend, it's businesses that spend. Both of them pay sales taxes. And it pretty much tracks. Sure, would you go back just one slide, please? And you can see how this tracks from 15 to 20, the dips. Next slide, please. And you can see how the sales tax collections and the PMI, they're both telling the same story. They both pretty much track economic activity in the region. And on a 12-month basis, the sales tax collections are flat. So this is a 12-month basis. So it has April and May in there, March, April, and May, which were negative, but it also had some really strong numbers last year, July, August, and September. So I imagine as we move further away from the strength in the first part of the series to the weakness in the second part, this number will likely fall below zero, where we'll see sales collections on a 12-month basis, trailing behind last year's pace. Slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about energy. Still very important to the region, and it always will be. Not quite as important as it was in the early part of this decade, but it is still real important. Slide. Refining utilization at the refineries, still just about, maybe we've got back to where we were during the downturn associated with Harvey. Now, no one's flying anywhere. No one's taking cruises. My wife and I bemoan the fact that we were not able to go on our cruise this summer. It's always been our tradition. You're not seeing people traveling as much to work. They're not out and about. So we're not consuming as much gasoline or diesel or Jet A. And so the refineries aren't processing as much because there's no demand for it. And that's reflected in what we see out in the field. Slide, please. You can see the drop off in the rig count. I never thought I'd see the rig count fall below 300 rigs. I mean, at the height of the fracking boom, we were at 1,931 rigs. At the worst part of the fracking bust, we fell to 404 rigs. Last Friday, we're at 251 rigs. There's just not a whole lot of oil wells being drilled because, for one, there's not the demand for the oil, and the other is Wall Street just doesn't want to lend any money to the industry anymore. Slide, please. And you're going to continue to see weakness in the oil patch. The green line is historic prices. These are monthly average prices. And if you look at futures prices going out the next 5 years, we don't see, based on the futures market, crude getting, West Texas Intermediate, getting above $50 a barrel. And that is a real concern, and I'll show you why. Next slide. This is a survey done by the Dallas Fed, and they asked producers in their territory, which is Texas and New Mexico, some of Oklahoma, what does it cost, how much does it cost to operate an existing well? So the well's already been drilled, and what's it cost for maintenance, for electricity, and so forth. And the average is anywhere between like $25 or $30 a barrel. So you can make a profit running an existing well for most of them. Although some of them, if you look on that range, some of them can't even cover the operating cost of an existing well. So the existing wells seem to do okay. Next slide. But you can see what it costs to run it, to drill a new well. You have to have oil pretty much $50 or more. and we're not going to get above $50 a barrel anytime soon. Slide, please. So talk about construction in the region. Slide. This is City of Houston building permits. So I did not have them for Pearland, but I do have them for the City of Houston, which is a good surrogate for a lot of what's going on in the region. Citywide permits year to date are down $500 million. Slide, please. And these are actual starts. And you're looking at, they're down about 1.5 billion in the region. Slide, please. Transportation. I don't know if you can tell, this is how I got both the airport and the port into one slide. If you look at the billboard, you can see the little container ship there. So let's talk about transportation. Next slide, please. Airport system traffic, when you look at it like this way, year to date, you think, well, we're only down 50%. But remember, we still had a pretty decent January, February, and first part of March. Slide, please. Next slide, please. Look at where we were for May. You know, the airport's handling less than 10% of the traffic it would normally handle in May. And that's the reason why you're seeing United and Southwest and American and all these airlines saying, come October, if things don't get better, we're probably going to see significant layoffs. Slide, please. May year to date, you can see Customs District traffic is actually doing fairly well. A lot of that's because early on, we were still exporting a lot of crude, but we're not exporting as much now. I can see this dropping off over time. Slide, please. Talk about housing, single-family housing in the region. Slide. Houston area home sales for the 9-county area. We had a little bit of a dip early part in the pandemic. Part of it is people did not want to put their homes on the market because they didn't want strangers coming in during the middle of a pandemic. And frankly, you had home buyers didn't want to go into a stranger's home, not knowing what they were going to pick up. So we saw a little bit of a drop off. But it's holding up fairly well. And it's interesting. I meet with a group of economists every 2 to 3 weeks, and we talk about all the data out there. We're having a hard time. We're trying to figure out why are home sales doing so well when the rest of the economy is doing so poorly. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Slide, please. And you look at single-family home sales year to date are really doing fairly well. Considering what the situation is. We sold 48,000, which is pretty much on par with what we've done the last 3 years. Slide. The concern, though, is that we're seeing fewer listings because there's still some reluctance to put the house on the market. Part of it is COVID, and part of it is people are concerned, well, I know what my payment is now, or my house is paid off. With all the economic uncertainty out there, I'm not sure I want to take on any additional risk. Slide, please. So some of the reasons why maybe the housing market is holding up so well, there's pent-up demand because no one was buying a house in March or April or early May. And now they figure maybe the worst for them job-wise is over with, so they can take the risk. I hear talk that maybe millennials are finally starting to buy homes. Low interest rates, they are so low. That is something which is making housing more affordable. Limited supply out there. And with the limited supply, there's this little bit of a sense of urgency. The robust stock market, it's sending a signal to some people out there. If they're, whether they're in 401k or their own portfolios, maybe things are holding up for them. And then there's this fear of missing out on the low interest rates. Slide, please. This is something from the Fed. This just gives you what you see happen with interest rates over the last 12 months. They went from a little over 3.6% to less than 3% now. And that's just a huge benefit for home buyers. And that may be the number one thing driving the housing market right now is these incredibly low interest rates. Slide, please. The other thing is the builders in Houston seem to do a very good job of being able to create a product which is affordable. This is from Metro Study. These are brand new homes being built. And you can see over half the homes that are projected to be built this year are going to be between $200,000 and $300,000, which is very, very affordable for most families. And then you jump that up to $300,000 to $400,000, and you're looking at 3/4 of all the homes out there that are going to be built are going to be priced between $200,000 and $400,000. And that's probably one of the reasons why the housing market is staying so strong, is that the builders have found ways to deliver a product that buyers can afford. Slide, please. A lot of data on this. It's hard to follow. I put it there so you know where the data comes from. But if you look at those two the red circle and the blue circle. This is something that I'm very grateful to David Jarvis at John Burns Consulting for allowing me to use this. That $200,000 home, 61% of all families in Houston could qualify for that. $350,000 home, almost 40% can. So that's probably that in interest rates, and the fact that the builders have been very flexible, they're allowed to be flexible, has kept home prices affordable and the housing market strong. Slide, please. Multifamily, it's struggling a bit. Next slide. You can see overall, the rental rates have fallen $14 since the beginning of the pandemic. Class A has fallen almost 60. Slide, please. And you can see that as far as trying to get people into the units, 65% of all Class A units have some sort of incentive. And when you have to offer that high level of incentive, it's telling me that the market is oversaturated. Slide, please. If you want to look at multifamily, one of the problems is we've just built too many. We've built over 21,000 units over the last 12 months. We have close to 19,000 under construction. So at a period in which Houston's economy, the region's economy struggles, we're adding close to 40,000 apartment units. We're going to continue to see weakness on rents. We're going to continue to see concessions. Slide, please. So a couple other things that we're looking at. Some of the data, the challenge is that it lags by anywhere from 4 weeks to 3 months. So we're trying to find things which might give us some insight to what's going on with the economy. And a lot of that's available now when you track web traffic. Slide, please. If you go to Google Trends and you search for the term unemployment benefits, and you can see how it peaked about the same time unemployment claims peaked for the US. And then you can see as you trail off, it still remains fairly high. If you search for unemployment benefits for just Houston, it's amazing how closely these track the actual filings. When I look at this, it tells me we're not going to be seeing a drop off in initial claims. It's still going to remain fairly high. Slide, please. If you want to look at mobility, this is when you turn on your phone. Google would like the locations turned on your maps and tracking over time. Google goes to great pains to say that it aggregates the data and the data is anonymized, made anonymous. But you can see none of these indicators have gotten back to where we were prior to the pandemic. You can look at that red one, the work one, and you see a couple dips and a couple pickups, but you can still see 35 to 40% of all people are still not going back into work, either work from home or they just don't have a job to go back to. Slide, please. You can see restaurant activities down. Slide, please. And you can see we do a survey of the partnership members, and they felt a lot more bullish in June than they feel now, if you look to that far right-hand side. So let me go to my last slides. Next slide, please. So we are trying to open back up. We're trying to do the best we can to get the economy going, but we need to be careful how we open safely. Slide, please. Consumers, though, are very worried. They're worried about the pandemic, as they rightly should be. And consumer confidence is very important for what's going on. If you consider that consumer accounts for about 67% of all economic activity. Slide, please. You see the increase in COVID cases in the region, how it's been. It's up over the last 7 days. Slide, please. And because that we're seeing the surging all over the U.S., and that's a concern. There's talk maybe that some of the states need to shut down their economy. Slide, please. And Governor Abbott has even asked that has become a little bit more bullish on everyone needing to wear masks to make sure that, or to try to control the spread of the virus. Slide, please. And then there's this discussion going on about the weekly unemployment benefit. On one hand, you can look at it as a safety net, helping people deal with being out of work. On the other hand, you can look at it as a way to continue to add spending into the economy. If we cut back severely, you're going to see spending cut back, and you're going to see a slower recovery. Slide, please. So, full reopening is going to depend upon a number of things. Personal finances, whether people have depleted their savings or taken on debt or emerged unscathed, whether they lost their job, whether they've since been able to find employment, or whether they've realized that their job is secure. That personal safety issue, are they in a high-risk group? Are they in a high-risk neighborhood? Are they in a high-risk occupation? And there's a certain amount of political tribalism there. Are individuals going to follow the guidelines of elected officials? or are they going to ignore guidance and make political statements? All that's going to come into play determining how well, how soon, how safely we reopen the economy. So next slide. So I'll read this. Ultimately, the timing of the virus is going to depend upon the timing of the recovery. You know, the economy won't fully reopen until the virus is no longer a threat to public health. With that, I'm done. Thank you very much. I know I went a little bit longer than I thought. I very much appreciate you staying on. Once again, my email address is pjankowski@houston.org, pjankowski@houston.org. Send me an email if you'd like a copy of the slides, and I'll be glad to send them to you. With that, I'll turn it back over and let Cheryl or Carol take over from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. And Trent, thank you also for that valuable information. We live in a time that is in a downturn, of course, but it's also a time of possibilities and new ideas and new projects. And so we're very thankful that you were here today and provide us with that great information. I do want to point out that I missed a CPI wire cloth and Merit Medical. They were also on the virtual event today. And Scott Youngblood, our Secretary Treasurer, was also on the event. And with that, I don't know if we have time for questions. I know many of you need to get back to work. Brian, what do you think?
If anyone wants to stay on, and if Patrick has time, you know, if you have a question, please ask. I mean,
Carol, can we ask the Ed Thompson question on census? He's got that in the chat. I think that would help everybody.
Okay, Ed, can you address that? I still have the screen up. Can you get rid of the screen, Cheryl?
So Representative Thompson's question is just, I'm sorry, are you on there, Ed?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just curious about how the partnership is kind of tracking this census information from everything that every indication we're getting. The numbers are, the reporting is down, and the numbers are down. In fact, I saw a graph the other day that with the numbers as they're projected right now, Texas would actually lose 2 congressional seats with the numbers the way they're showing at this point, we were supposed to go the other direction and actually pick up 2 congressional seats. So I just wonder about the census and what kind of impact that would have on business in the partnerships or in the region, I guess, more than anything.
It's not just the possible loss of congressional seats. It's also when federal programs are set up for funding, they're usually done on a prorational share. If we come in as having less population, then when it comes time for federal grants or any sort of federal program, we'll have less money allocated to the region. The partnership's aware of this. We're doing what we can. We've been communicating mainly through the employers, getting the employers to make sure that they encourage their employees to respond. The concern is right now, there's so much everyone is concerned about with their jobs and the COVID-19, and there's been some misinformation. We have a very high Hispanic population here, and there are some concerns. Hispanics are worried that, frankly, there are some that are undocumented, and there's just all this sort of concern is this sort of information will be used against them, and that's probably one of the things which is suppressing the response rate. But also it's just that everyone is so worried about what's going on with COVID-19 and the economy. Responding to a census form is very low on their priority list. They're just wanted to make sure that they stay safe and they can feed their families.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I asked the question because I think it's important that for all of us that we do our part in trying to get people to respond to these. And from what I understand, the president has actually decided to move this thing along. It was supposed to be delayed, I think, until probably sometime in July. And now there's supposedly extra funding going into it, and they're going to push it up to where it will actually supposedly stay on track. So that worries me that that this undercount might actually be the case.
Well, and there's also the potential for the undercount to be challenged in the courts too.
Yeah.
That's been, it's very common for, I know the city did that the last decennial census on their count. It's just, there's just so much going on right now that it's such a low priority for so many people. We're just trying to stay healthy and get the economy going.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Representative Paul, do you have any words of advice for us?
Well, I would just say stay healthy, stay working, and keep doing what y'all are doing. And this kind of event is a fantastic thing to help spur us all on. Looking at those numbers, the only way we're going to grow out of that is to all of us work